For some people, the mention of Hays and Ellis County brings to mind Oktoberfest, Catholic churches, and Volga German immigrants. But who were the Volga Germans? Find out on today's episode of History in Hays. Welcome back to History in Hays, a series exploring different historic events in Hays and the surrounding areas. I'm Reagan Neufeld, and on today's episode, I am joined by Jerry Brown, a member of the Ellis County Historical Society Board. Jerry, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited for this opportunity.
So before we actually get started, can you just take a moment to sort of give me a little bit about your background? Where did you grow up and how did you come into your role with the Historical Society?
Absolutely. So I was born and raised in Ellis County, so I've lived here my entire life. Grew up in Victoria and came to Hays to go to college, and then got a job teaching with the school district out of college, and then I've been here ever since. So that got me into Hays, and history has always been important to me. I've always enjoyed that. And I was involved with a group called the American Historical Society of Germans from Russia from an early age. I'm one of those people that they lost money on with membership because I bought my life membership when I was 18. Through that, I got to kind of know Amanda Rupp, who is the director here at the Historical Society, and she encouraged me to consider potentially trying to serve on the board here at the Ellis County Historical Society, and I jumped at that opportunity. I thought that was a great fit for my interests, and also with the exciting things that were going to be going on with the Historical Society, reopening the museum and the expansions and the things that we were doing, just really made me very excited to jump in and try and learn and give my talents. And so that was 3 years ago, and here I am. So I'm very excited to be on the board.
Yeah, that's awesome. So today's episode is all about the Volga Germans, and it's very common when you're in Hays, or I feel like even if you just hear about Hays, you hear the words Volga German. But what does that even mean?
Right. So a lot of people have the misconception that there's a place in Germany called Volga, and that's where they come from. And actually, that's not the case at all. When we refer to Volga Germans, we're referring to people who have German ancestry and German heritage who left Germany and the surrounding area in the 1760s, and they went and settled in Russia. And in Russia, they were settled along the Volga River in Russia, and that's where the name came from. So when these German-speaking people left Russia to come to the United States and eventually to here in Hays, Kansas, they were referred to Volga German because that's the river region in Russia from where they came.
Interesting. So what was going on both in Europe and then also in Kansas at the time of the Volga German settlement?
Sure. So there's kind of a two-part migration, as I kind of alluded to in that first part. And so in that German region in the 1760s was a big upheaval. They'd been living through war, and they were just kind of tired of being peasants and being always fighting. And so Catherine the Great she was the Tsarina of Russia at the time, and she gave them an invitation to come and settle in her land now. She was a German to begin with and ended up being a Russian, wife of the Russian Tsar. And so she invited them to live there along the steppes, which is a long, drawn-out story that we don't have to get into. But about 100 years later, a lot of the promises that she had made kind of started to fall away. And she had passed, and there was new leadership. And a lot of the things that they promised, self-governance and maintaining their own culture and their own customs, and mainly was they were, for lack of a better term, they didn't have to serve in the Russian military, and that was being pulled away. And the whole reason they left Germany was to avoid being in war, and they were tired of that. And so they began to look. And so they had sent scouts out to all kinds of places, North America, South America, Canada, all over the place, looking for another opportunity for their people. And they kind of decided that Kansas fit them. And so coming to Kansas was a fit for them because they were farmers in Russia. And obviously, Kansas is farm country. And Kansas at the time, it was like this magic bullet of railroad expansion, westward expansion of settlements, Homestead Act, all those kind of things that were providing the people who are looking for a place to live the opportunity to do that. Free or very inexpensive land, the ability to start their own communities and maintain their customs and culture, and jobs in agriculture and in the railroads. So that really was the recipe, I think, that brought them to this part of the country.
So then my next question is, what about Hays made it, appealing to so many of the Volga Germans? Because I'm from Inman in McPherson County, and around that area there is obviously a lot of German heritage, but they're German Mennonites.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting to me to see the difference between the two areas.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a little bit of a population vacuum in Ellis County in this area. I mean, we had Hays, and then you had maybe these little tiny upcroppings, but there really wasn't much as far as population centers. And so, like I said, the ability to get the land to farm, and then the ability to kind of settle together within their own family groups, because that was really important to them. They were a very close-knit community, and probably much like with the Mennonites in Inman, they didn't just move a family at a time. It was these big groups, these big clusters of families, like hundreds of people at the same time. And so they had the opportunity in Ellis County because of that kind of open and I don't know if I want to say welcoming, but that open kind of vacuum of population allowed them to come in mass and still settle together. And I think that was really, what drew them here. So the railroad was there. They had a population and a commerce hub in Hays that they could tap onto, but they didn't have to live there. They could have their own little communities. I think it was like the perfect storm, so to speak, and they just really thrived in that area with agriculture and other industry at that time.
Yeah, so then once they got here, what was life like for the Volga Germans? And I want to ask this question before we get too far off of it, but because in a previous episode when I talked to Adam Conkey out at historic Fort Hays, we talked about the violence that was present in Hays. And so it's just very interesting. You wonder how it goes from being kind of a violent atmosphere to then you have the Volga Germans settling in who are, like you've said, farmers.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because a lot of people say that the immigration of the Volga Germans to this area kind of put a temper on that violence nature. It kind of almost ushered that kind of era of Hays kind of out, because there was this stable family environment. There was this very religious communities that kind of prospered and expanded in the area. And so, there wasn't really a highly functioning Catholic church in Ellis County until we kind of showed up. I mean, they tried at the fort and in Hays to have, some smaller Catholic congregations. And then all of a sudden, here you have hundreds and hundreds of these people, very profound in their faith and dedicated to their religion and their church. I think that whole culture just kind of changed everything. So, but their way of life, obviously was difficult. If you think about it, all of the little towns that sparked up along a riverbed somewhere, and there was nothing. So these people built their homes again from nothing. Sod houses, digging into the ground, cutting what few trees they had. So then they had to excavate and dig up the limestone to build their homes and their structures. And so there's stories of people who rented an apartment in Hays and walked back and forth, 10 or 15 miles a day to their little homesteads to try and build these homes and these communities. And so I would say it was a very difficult, hard time in their life, but ended up being very fulfilling in the fact that they were able to recreate in a way the family-centered communities that they came from, and then still be able to kind of maintain their own identity and not assimilate, which has kind of preserved, in a sense, the customs and traditions and the things that are very common amongst the Volga Germans, because they were able to isolate themselves somewhat from the Wild West that was just down the road, but yet they would go into town from time to time and do those things. So that's one of those weird things that's trying to wrap my head around, like my great-grandfather, the farmer, elbow to elbow with the gunfighter. It just doesn't ring true in my mind that that's how that should be, but we know that it probably happened because it was the same time frame. I mean, it had to happen. They were close together. So I think that's kind of an interesting perspective to look at historically.
Definitely, yeah. That's something I've kind of been thinking about too when preparing for this. So how does that way of life eventually evolve to what we see now in Hays and the surrounding communities in Ellis County?
Yeah, I mean, as anything passes in time and mobility becomes more prominent, I mean, people back in the time, I mean, they were isolated, probably somewhat by choice, but also isolated by just modes of transportation. I mean, when you have take horse and buggy and things like that, you don't travel as far. So obviously with the advent of the car and people working outside the home and going into to towns to find their jobs, and then at the same time, family is exploding, and so you have these many children and not a lot of land. People start to move away, and so the culture seems to somewhat deplete. Not deplete, but dilute is maybe the better word. And so how does that change into what we see today? Well, it's interesting. People have said that they are still surprised at how much of our culture is alive and well and still practiced by people who are almost 150 years removed from those initial customs and traditions. But I think it's because of the high concentration of people who share that same kind of zest, just that understanding and that common theme of life. And so I think you see that still today, and we hope that it doesn't erode. I think that's why doing things like this are so important, because people are still interested in their history. They just don't know where to look to get it anymore as they get more and further removed from people who lived it firsthand. And so the more we can preserve it and record it for posterity purposes, allows people to tap back into it and reconnect with their past.
Yeah, building off of that, how is the Volga German heritage still seen in Hays and Ellis County? I mean, obviously we're recording this during Oktoberfest week.
Right.
So that's a pretty big thing. But then also you look at like the historical churches that you were talking about, and then of course those German last names that are so common here.
They're so common, they'll roll right off the tongue of the local, but the new people coming in are like, how do you say that? Definitely those things are very much still there and something that you can tap into. I think you're going to find that with the foods. You're going to find, where else are you going to go to get a bierach? Where else are you going to go to get, dumplings and blackberry, schwarzbeer? Where are you going to get those kind of things except here sometimes? And so I think the food is definitely something that has maintained and has a foothold that won't go away. I think some of like the games, like right now in the other room, we're playing Duroc, and so we're keeping alive some of the games and traditions, the dancing, the language, even to a certain extent, is still kind of left. And like you referred to the churches, the structures themselves, but I think the religion itself. I mean, most towns the size of Hays, anywhere else in the world, wouldn't have 4 Catholic churches. I mean, there's just a predominance of that, of the culture and the language and the customs and the religion and the families. And I think you hit on all of those with it. And of course, the highlight, Oktoberfest. Let's just enjoy it. So I think those kind of celebrations are great.
Is there anything else that's besides those 3 things that I mentioned that are sort of other ways that the heritage pops up today?
Like I mentioned the food, and I think that's really a big thing. It's something that, I belong to several Facebook groups and threads about people from all over the world who have some sort of Volga German connection, and it always is interesting to me what people associate with Hays, with that coming home feel, and a lot of it has to do with funny stories that their grandparents may have told them, and usually there's some obscure German word in there that they don't know what it means, or it's the foods that they remember their grandmother making, or the games that they played. I think those kind of things are people remember, and they are such a everyday type thing in most of the local people's lives that they don't think of it as something super special or super unique until you come in from the outside world and you see it, and then it's like, oh, it's not like that everywhere else. People don't know what I'm talking about when I say X, Y, and Z. And so I think that makes it unique for the people locally when we talk about the culture.
And that sort of solidifies Hays as that quote-unquote regional center of this culture, right?
I would definitely say so, because the little German named villages don't roll off the tongue as easy, and also it's not recognizable. Hays is what was recognizable, and when Hays was crowned, the German capital of Kansas, people were like, well, what about all those other German places in Kansas? And I'm like, I get that, but we kind of can help represent all of you. This is, I think, what draws all of those German cultures and German communities together in their strive to maintain their identity. And I think you're exactly right. I think that's what makes Hays that center hub, because it's big enough to maintain it and have the things that can be offered to propagate the culture and the traditions and keep it alive. I think that's important.
Yeah, so speaking of maintaining it and keeping it alive, something that I've been really interested in, and again, researching for this and preparing for this, is do you think, as you said, some people are 150 years removed from their ancestors coming here. So do you think as we get further away from those generations who first came over here, do you think it will continue to be celebrated as much?
I hope so. I really do hope so, and I think it will, because people are making a conscious effort right now to not let that history be forgotten. The Historical Society here, the Ellis County Historical Society, is on the verge of opening our expansion site in Victoria to highlight the Volga German tradition. That will cement that as a permanent structure that people can see, and they can go and remember what that was like. To remember that, to not let it be forgotten. And I think it's those little pieces along the way, and kind of the resurgence a little bit of Oktoberfest, not just for the beer drinking part, but some of the cultural and custom parts of it, that blend and that mesh together, I think hopefully will not let those traditions die. It is definitely a possibility. It is definitely something that happens in most ethnic group settings as they move away and populations blend. And that's what America is all about, is that big melting pot. But we don't want to forget who we were and who we are. And I think that, and I hope that is going to last for many, many, many years to come.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I feel like most people know that it's important to know where they come from and kind of understand how they got to where they are now, but it's for whatever reason, sometimes it's hard to do that.
Sometimes it is hard to do that. And I think we can hold on to just those little things. that we may not even think are Volga German specifically, but that we just have brought into our life and kind of taken on as our own. And that might be good enough, just to keep the spirit alive. Even if we don't remember exactly where it came from, we can still carry that with us.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add that I didn't ask about or we haven't touched on?
I mean, I guess I would just say that there are a lot of big things came out of the Volga Germans coming here. A lot of entrepreneurship, a lot of business sense, highly praised businessmen and architects, and all the things. And so I think that there's been a big contribution to the community by this group of people that sometimes just gets blended in with the rest of Hays history, as it should, because it all is just part of Hays history. But to kind of understand that a lot of times when people think of the Volga Germans, they just think of the little German Catholic farmers. And while that was a lot of the people, it was more than that. They were progressive folks who really made a big impact on agriculture, oil, business, education, music in the area, and that I think will help propagate and perpetuate the culture and the customs and the legacy.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that will be it for today's episode. So thank you so much again for joining me. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. I appreciate you asking me. This has been a great experience. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for listening to History in Hays. Tune in next time to hear about the founding of Fort Hays State University, its many names, and how it has served Western Kansas since 1902.